really happy to be down here. I like getting to visit Moscow. And yeah, so I'll get into it. I'm going to start off with a bit of an introduction just to give you some background about ICL and myself, and then we'll get into mining. And this will be a very 101 conversation, so some of you may kind of roll your eyes a bit. Oh, yeah, I already know about that, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, and so we're going to kind of get at some of the fundamentals of mining in Idaho. I work for the Idaho Conservation League, and we are Idaho's largest state-based nonprofit environmental group. We were founded in 1973, and we have over 11,000 members throughout the state and abroad. And our mission really broadly is to protect Idaho's environment. Pretty simple. And the way we do that is we work on water quality issues, air quality, mining, public lands, endangered species, climate change, essentially the gamut of environmental issues going on in Idaho. We have about 22 staff who are full-time, most of whom are based in Boise, about 16 people. And then we have 2 field offices, one in Ketchum, Idaho, and one in Sandpoint, which is where I work. We split up the remainder of our staff. The program staff for ICL each have a portfolio of work that they do, and some of the issues are larger, some of the issues are smaller. But the organization as a whole, at this moment in time, focuses on 4 priority campaigns. And the first one is climate change. Our goal is to make Idaho carbon neutral. The second priority campaign is to save wild salmon and steelhead from extinction. They are teetering on the brink right now. The third campaign is to protect and restore large connected landscapes, to protect public lands in Idaho. And the fourth campaign is to clean up the Snake River. The Snake River is one of Idaho's most notable rivers, and in some stretches of that river, you can't let your dog go swimming because it's too toxic. This is a picture of our staff in Boise. It's a really great crew. If you ever find yourself in the Boise area or in Sandpoint or Ketchum, don't hesitate to stop by and say hello. And if you've got issues or concerns, we're always happy to chat with people about those. As I said, I work in the Sandpoint field office, and I work with 3 other people, or 2 other people, Shelby Herbert, who's our engagement assistant, and Brad Smith, who's our North Idaho director. And we are tasked with monitoring and working on issues from the Salmon River to the Canadian border, which is a pretty huge region to work in. And we obviously can't work on every single issue that goes on in our area in North Idaho. What we try to do is monitor the region and then strategically pick the issues that our members are really concerned about, the issues that have the potential to impact the environment the most, and the issues that we feel we have the resources to move the needle on, and that would be the most effective use of our limited time and manpower. Just a little background about me is, as was mentioned, sort of like the seed for me getting interested in conservation started when I was at the University of Montana studying philosophy. And I was really interested in ethics and what makes something right and something wrong, and spent most of my time getting ready to try and make a career out of that until I had a sit down with one of my professors who I really respected. And he was very encouraging. He thought, if I wanted to do it, I should go for it. But in his view, philosophy had started to become it had already been for a long time too academic, and it wasn't informing the day-to-day lives of people in the world. And he felt that I should give law consideration because not only do you, in the law, you get to think about concepts like large theoretical concepts like justice and what's right, but you actually get to go out in the world and apply it and try to make a difference. And you also have a little bit better odds of supporting yourself and making a living rather than a philosophy professor. So this was kind of a surprise conversation in my 4th year of undergraduate, and I wasn't quite ready to make the jump into law school, so I took a job with the U.S. Forest Service as a wildland firefighter, and I worked on a 20-person crew traveling throughout the western United States fighting forest fires. And it was there that, I'd grown up in Colorado camping and skiing and backpacking, but I didn't really understand from growing up in Colorado what public lands were all about, like the vast extent of public lands that we have, how special and wild they are, how they're managed, the different issues going on public lands. And so it was on this crew that I got my first taste of that. And I also got to see how influential policy changes can be in terms of protecting the environment. So back in the early 1900s, after some large fires, the Forest Service created this policy of we will suppress fires 100% of the time because fires are bad. And that was the mentality for decades and decades until relatively recently when scientists and policymakers and lawyers started to learn and started to share the fact that fire is part of the landscape and that it actually is part of the ecological health of the forests in the western United States. And so on several of the fires that I was on with this crew, we actually were told to stand down and just monitor because the fire was in a place where we could allow it to burn safely without endangering private property or endangering the lives of the firefighters. And so it was just a really interesting thing to see a whole federal agency make this dramatic shift to help the environment. And I thought that the law would be a way for me to be a part of that. So that catalyzed my decision to go to law school. And I went to the University of Colorado and focused in environmental law. This is a picture of me feeling very sorry for myself, studying for the bar exam during the summer after I graduated. It was not a fun time, but I muscled through it. And after a clerkship in Colorado, I took a position with ICL and have been in Sandpoint for about 3 years. So getting to mining on public lands, I want to start out and make sure we're on the same page. When I say public lands, I use it synonymously with federal public lands, and that's just to say that the federal government owns the land, and in other words, we own the land as U.S. citizens. And the reason that ICL focuses on public lands when it comes to mining is a couple of reasons. One, we have a lot of them in Idaho. Around 60% of Idaho is public land, which we're very fortunate to have. The other reason that we focus on public lands when it comes to mining is that a lot of the valuable minerals that exist in the mountainous and geologically unique areas in public lands in Idaho, and so that's where a lot of the mining occurs. And the third reason is that when we engage a mining issue, we often rely on the laws that are the strongest, that give us the most leverage, and more often it's the federal environmental laws that allow us to move the needle and have influence on some of these decisions. And so we just don't have the same leverage that we do on federal public lands as opposed to state lands or private lands. So that's why we tend to focus on public lands, and that's why this presentation will mostly be about public land. The other reason, the final reason that we focus on public lands when it comes to mining is that they are, for most of us, many of us, the reason that we've come to Idaho, the reason why we love Idaho, the reason why we've chosen to raise our families here. And public lands are home to wild and exotic creatures, and some that exist only in Idaho, some that exist in quantities or qualities only in Idaho. These are mountain goats from this summer on the top of Scotchman Peak up in North Idaho. Just came up to us a few feet away when we hiked up this summer. Public lands are often where some of the most beautiful places are in Idaho. This is a picture of the Bighorn Crags. My colleague Brad took 2 summers ago when he went backpacking there. We recreate on public lands. A lot of our outdoor recreation industries rely on public lands for their living. Public lands are also where we go to gain perspective over the world and ourselves. And they're also a place where we can just enjoy ourselves and have a cold beer, and where the water for cold beer comes from. And very importantly, public lands are the things that we share with others and that we pass on to other generations. So I raise that because we want to remember why we care. So we care because public lands offer us these important values. And the worry is that mining has a lot of risk for public lands. Mining, as reported by the EPA, is the #1 toxic polluter. The industry itself is the #1 toxic polluter in the United States. This is a picture of the Gold King mine spill in Colorado when the EPA was managing an abandoned mine that mining company had just left for the taxpayers to deal with, and a plug that was backing up some of the contaminated mine water in the mining tunnels failed and released about 3 million gallons of contaminated water into the Animas River in Colorado, coloring it that yellow color. Mining is harmful to public lands and also to public health. This is a picture of the Silver Valley in Idaho, and that's the Bunker Hill smelter. And the Silver Valley was the site of extensive mining. It was one of the most prolific silver and lead mines in the entire world. Beginning in the late 1800s is when the mining really got going there. And in addition to mining, they had this lead smelter that released air pollution. And by the 1970s, about 98% of the children in the Silver Valley had blood lead levels of 40 micrograms per deciliter. And no level of lead in blood is safe, but just to give context to that, when the Flint, Michigan water crisis was at its peak in 2015, blood lead levels in children there were just 1.3 micrograms per deciliter. So 40 is incredibly high, and actually one child unfortunately tested with one of the highest blood lead levels ever tested in the world at 164 micrograms per deciliter. So mining is super risky for public health. It's also can be even riskier for wildlife too. Just this year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service identified at least 145 tundra swans that were poisoned with lead and died in the Coeur d'Alene Basin. And that's because the mining that occurred up there, they discharged the contaminated mine waste into the river, and it spread throughout the floodplains and the wetlands. And when tundra swans in particular fly across the Pacific Flyway, they land in the wetlands in the riparian area, and they dig their beaks into the wetlands to eat roots and tubers, and it's all covered in contaminated sediments with lead. So it's still a huge problem all these years later, even though for the most part there's not much mining, save 2 mines operating in the Silver Valley right now today.